My name is Olivia Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, my family treated me like the invisible daughter. If you had told me 10 years ago that the very people who dismissed me would one day come begging at my door, I would have laughed. Or maybe cried, but here we are. The beginning of my story isn't glamorous. I grew up in a small coastal town where my parents ran Hayes Marine Supply, a local business my grandfather built from the ground up. My older brother, Connor, was the heir apparent. From the moment he could walk, Dad was teaching him how to handle inventory, negotiate prices with fishermen, and talk confidently to suppliers. And me. I was the girl told to help your mother in the office, or make yourself useful somewhere else. Every time I asked about taking on more responsibility, my father's laugh cut me down. Olivia, you're good with words, not numbers. Leave the business to Connor, it's in his blood. I wanted to believe them, that maybe I was different, not less, but each dismissal chipped away at me until silence became my habit. I went to college on a scholarship, studied marketing, and moved out without looking back. By the time I turned 25, I was managing campaigns for tech startups in the city. It wasn't glamorous pay, but I was building something of my own. No one in my family asked about it. No phone calls, no visits. Holidays came and went with excuses about how the shop was too busy or Connor's schedule was packed. The only person who truly believed in me was my grandmother, Ruth. She was quiet, steady, and sharp as a blade wrapped in velvet. While my parents dismissed my city job, Grandma asked questions. How do you find clients? What's the hardest part of building a brand? What are you most proud of? I lived for those questions, for the way her eyes lit up when I explained my projects. She'd smile and say, Olivia, you have a mind your father doesn't understand. One day that will matter. I didn't realize how much until she passed away. It was a Tuesday when I got the call. My father's voice was clipped, almost businesslike. Grandma's gone, service on Friday, be here? No softness, no warmth. Just instructions. I drove the 3 hours back to my hometown, rehearsing condolences that never seemed to land. The service was packed. Grandma had touched more lives than I realized. But my family, they acted like it was just another obligation. Connor stood near the front shaking hands like a politician. My parents whispered to guests about how hard it's been running the business since Grandma's health declined. Not one of them cried. After the burial, the attorney called us into a small conference room above the town bank. My parents sat with tight smiles, Connor stretched in his chair like a king waiting for his crown. I sat at the edge, quiet, bracing for the inevitable. The attorney adjusted his glasses and began to read. Grandma's estate wasn't enormous, but the room shifted when he got to the final section. To my granddaughter, Olivia Hayes, I leave the remainder of my personal savings account, totaling $450,000, as well as the deed to the waterfront property on Harbor Street. I believe she will know what to do with it. The silence was deafening. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hand gripped her pearls. Connor let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. That must be a mistake, Dad said, his voice low but dangerous. Mom knew the business belongs to Connor. The attorney cleared his throat. The business remains with your son, yes, but the property and savings were Mrs. Ruth Hayes's personal assets. She was within her rights to distribute them as she saw fit. Connor leaned forward, his smirk dripping with disdain. You can't be serious. Olivia wouldn't know the first thing about managing property. She'll blow the money in 6 months. My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice calm. It's not your concern, Connor. His eyes narrowed. Everything in this family is my concern. I didn't argue, there was no point. But inside, something lit up, a spark I hadn't felt in years. Grandma had trusted me. She saw value where they only saw failure. And that property, an abandoned warehouse overlooking the harbor, wasn't just land, it was potential. For weeks, I visited the building every evening after work. It smelled like salt and rust, with peeling paint and broken windows. Most people saw decay. I saw possibility. I thought about Grandma's words. You'll know what to do. And I did. I poured myself into plans. I took online courses on restaurant management. I met with architects and local planners. I even reconnected with old classmates who were chefs and brewers. Piece by piece, the vision grew. The Wharf Collective, a waterfront restaurant and event space showcasing local food, art, and music. A hub for the community. Of course, my family heard about it quickly. Small towns have loud whispers. Dad called one night, his voice heavy with forced calm. Olivia, your mother and I think it's best you sell the property to Connor. He can expand the shop, it's what your grandmother would have wanted. No, I said simply. You don't have the experience for this, don't be foolish. I have the savings. I have the deed and I have a plan. The line went silent for a moment before he spat. You'll regret this. Maybe, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of their threats. 6 months later, the doors to the Wharf Collective opened. Not polished perfection, yet. But warm lights glowed across the dock, tables were set with simple flowers, and the smell of seared scallops and fresh bread drifted into the night. My staff was small but passionate. A chef who'd been laid off from a hotel kitchen, a server putting herself through nursing school, and a local musician eager to play weekends. Opening night was magic. Strangers filled the room with laughter and clinking glasses. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years came up to say, "Your grandmother would be proud." I fought tears as I carried plates, wiped counters, and watched the dream breathe. But when I looked toward the back, I saw them, my parents, Connor. Standing just outside the glass doors, arms crossed, faces tight with disapproval. They didn't step inside. They didn't congratulate me. They just stood there like vultures circling, then turned away into the night. For a moment their absence hurt, but then a couple at the bar raised their glasses to me. "To Olivia," they said, "to building something real." And the hurt turned to fire. I thought that might be the end of it, that maybe they'd sulk and move on. But I should have known better. The Hayes family never lets go of control willingly. 2 weeks later, I got my first taste of their plan, a call from a supplier. "Sorry, Olivia, we can't deliver anymore. Your father made it clear we'd lose the shop's business if we kept working with you." I hung up, heart pounding, but I didn't crumble. Grandma hadn't left me this chance so I could fold at the first sign of sabotage. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal, the same words that had carried me from the conference room to this moment. They wanted me invisible. I'll make myself undeniable. The sabotage started quietly, like a draft seeping through cracks. Suppliers backing out, a permit suddenly delayed at City Hall. Rumors swirling in the harbor that my restaurant was unsafe or bleeding money. Every time I traced the whispers back, the trail led to the same place, my family. Connor had influence. He grew up with the fishermen, the vendors, the local politicians who relied on Hayes Marine Supply. My father had decades of business relationships built on favors and debts. To them, I was the outsider daring to challenge the family hierarchy. But they underestimated me. When the fish supplier canceled, I drove an hour north to a small cooperative of younger fishermen I'd read about online. They'd been struggling to break into the market because the older generation dismissed them. When I walked into their weathered dock office, I expected skepticism. Instead, a wiry man named Matteo grinned. "You're the one starting the collective, right? We've been waiting for someone to give us a chance." That night, Matteo's crew delivered the freshest catch I'd ever seen. My chef nearly cried slicing into a halibut that shimmered like silver. When the produce vendor backed out, I didn't panic. I drove inland to a family farm I remembered from childhood field trips. The owner, a woman in her 50s named Nora, squinted when I introduced myself. "Hayes family, huh?" she said cautiously. I swallowed hard. "Yes, but I'm not them. I'm building something different. If you give me a chance, I'll prove it." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Your grandmother once lent me money to keep this farm alive during a drought. I'll deliver to you, for her." Piece by piece, I built new bridges where my family tried to burn them. Every setback forced me to expand beyond their reach, and in doing so, I created a supply chain they couldn't touch. But the rumors, that was harder. I'd walk through the town square and hear whispers. "She's reckless. The restaurant's just a vanity project. She'll run out of money by Christmas." Each word cut, but I refused to bleed in public. Instead, I invited the community in. I hosted open mic nights, art shows, cooking classes for kids. Slowly, people saw for themselves what the Wharf Collective stood for. Not just food, but belonging. It was during one of those nights, while a local band played on our makeshift stage, that I saw Connor walk in. He didn't order food. He didn't clap for the band. He just stood near the back, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. When our eyes met, he smirked. Afterward, he cornered me in the alley behind the restaurant. "Cute place," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But you're not running a charity, Liv. You're running a business, and you're out of your depth." "I'm doing fine," I said evenly. He stepped closer. "Dad says you've embarrassed the family. He wants you to sell before you make a fool of yourself. We'll take the property off your hands. Generous offer." I laughed, though my hands shook. "Generous? You sabotaged me for weeks and now you want me to hand it over?" His smirk widened. "Think bigger, Liv. You can't beat us. We own this town. You're just a guest." I stared at him, remembering every year I'd been told I didn't belong, every dinner where I'd been invisible, every sneer. Something cold and steady rose inside me. "I may be a guest," I said quietly, But guests can leave and build elsewhere. Hosts, though, when people stop respecting them, the whole house rots. He scoffed and walked away. But for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. 2 weeks later, the storm broke. I was prepping for dinner service when my phone buzzed. It was Nora, the farmer. Her voice trembled. "Olivia, I'm sorry, I can't deliver this week. Your father called. Said if I keep working with you, he'll cut me off from Hayes Marine. I can't lose that contract. It feeds my family." The line went silent except for her ragged breathing. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'll figure something out. Thank you for being honest." When I hung up, my chest tightened. They were tightening the noose. If they kept squeezing suppliers, I wouldn't survive. That night after closing, I sat alone at a table, head in my hands. For the first time since opening, doubt crept in. Maybe Connor was right. Maybe I was in over my head. Then I remembered the envelope Grandma had left me along with the deed. At the time, I hadn't read it fully, too overwhelmed by grief. I pulled it from the safe in my office, unfolded the paper, and read her shaky but deliberate handwriting. "Olivia, if you're holding this, it means you've chosen to build, not to sell. Good, but you will face resistance. The Hayes name carries weight, both good and bad. Use it only when you must. And remember, family is not who shares your blood. It's who shares your burdens. Choose wisely, and you'll never be alone." I sat there for a long time, the words burning into me. Never alone. The next morning, I drafted an email to every customer who had ever walked through our doors. I explained the sabotage, not in anger but in truth. I shared names of our local suppliers, praised their courage, and asked the community to support them directly. I ended with a simple line. "The Wharf Collective isn't just my dream, it's ours. If you want it to survive, come, bring friends, share a meal that belongs to all of us." By evening, the post had spread across town. Neighbors shared it, students reposted, even strangers from nearby cities commented, "We're coming this weekend." And they did. That Friday, we had a line out the door. People clapped for the musicians, kids painted on canvases we set up outside, couples toasted with local wine. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a movement. I worked until midnight, bone-tired but alive. When I finally stepped outside, Connor was waiting again, his face hard. "You think this little pity parade will last?" he hissed. "You embarrassed us publicly. Dad's furious. Mom's humiliated. You've made enemies you can't handle." I looked him in the eye, unflinching. "Maybe, but I also made allies you can't touch." He sneered, but I noticed his hands trembling. That night, as I locked the door, I knew the war had only just begun. They wouldn't stop. But neither would I, because Grandma was right. I wasn't alone anymore. And soon, everyone would see exactly who the Hayes family really was. The morning the headline hit, I knew the tide had finally turned. Hayes family accused of sabotaging local restaurant. It wasn't a blog post or a whispered rumor this time. It was the front page of the Harbor Chronicle. The journalist I'd invited months ago to the Wharf Collective had dug deep. She interviewed Mateo, who spoke about the intimidation he'd faced. She quoted Nora, who admitted, through tears, that she'd been pressured by my father. And she didn't stop there. She included screenshots Natalie, my cousin by marriage, had given her, emails from my father threatening suppliers, texts from Connor bragging about teaching Liv a lesson. Proof. By noon, the article had spread beyond the harbor. Regional outlets picked it up. People who had never set foot in our town were tweeting, "Support the Wharf Collective. Stand with Olivia." At first, I was too stunned to react. I sat in my office, hands shaking, as reservations poured in faster than we could log them. Then the phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was brittle, the kind of sweetness that comes just before it shatters. "Olivia, what have you done? You've ruined us, your father's reputation, Connor's career. Do you realize the damage?" I listened in silence. When she finally paused, I spoke slowly. "No, Mom, I didn't ruin us, you did. I just stopped covering for it." She gasped like I'd slapped her, then hung up. That night the restaurant was packed. The line stretched down the block. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses drowned out my thoughts. For the first time since opening, I stepped back and just watched. The band played, children colored at the corner table. A group of college students sang "Happy Birthday" to their friend over cheesecake. It wasn't survival anymore. It was joy, but I knew my family wouldn't disappear quietly. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a summons. My parents and Connor had filed a defamation suit. They claimed I'd slandered the Hayes name, that my statements to the community and the press had caused irreparable financial harm. When I read the papers, I laughed bitterly. They wanted to drag me back into the one arena they thought they could win, a courtroom. I called Daniel, the retired attorney who had helped me with the restaurant's incorporation. His voice was steady. Let them try, the truth is on your side. And you have evidence they don't want anyone to see. The trial lasted 3 days. The courtroom was packed, reporters jostling for seats. My parents sat at one table, polished and perfect. Connor leaned back in his suit, smirk firmly in place. Their lawyer thundered about family loyalty, about a wayward daughter inventing lies for attention. He painted me as unstable, ungrateful, vindictive. Then Daniel rose. He didn't shout, he simply laid out the evidence. Screenshots, witness testimony, financial records showing my father had tried to bribe the landlord into terminating my lease, Nora's statement about threats, Mateo's logs of canceled orders, and finally, my grandmother's letter. I read it aloud to the court, my voice steady even as my throat burned. Family is not who shares your blood, it's who shares your burdens. Choose wisely and you'll never be alone. Silence followed. Not even Connor smirked then. When the judge ruled in my favor, dismissing their suit with prejudice, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. A reporter shouted, "Olivia, what do you want to say to your family now?" I smiled softly. Nothing, they already heard it. And they chose not to listen. That night, the Wharf Collective was busier than ever. Customers toasted, staff laughed, and a banner someone had hung outside read, "Community over greed." But the true moment of victory came weeks later. I was closing up when Nora walked in with a basket of fresh produce. She looked tired, but her eyes shone. "Olivia," she said, setting the basket down, "since the article, people have been lining up to buy from us. I almost gave up, but you," her voice cracked, "you saved us." Behind her, Mateo entered, holding a crate of fish. "Same here, we're selling out every day. You gave us a chance when no one else would." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Grandma had been right, I wasn't alone. Word spread far beyond the harbor. A television crew came to film a feature. Food critics called, investors reached out. I said no to most of them. I didn't want the Wharf Collective to lose its soul, but I said yes to one thing. Opening a second location. Downtown, in a renovated warehouse with a rooftop garden and a community kitchen. On opening night, I stood in the doorway, apron tied tight, heart pounding. The lines stretched around the block. Inside, the tables gleamed, candles flickered, and staff bustled with nervous excitement. As the first guests walked in, I whispered to myself, "This is for you, Grandma." Later that night, during the rush, I caught my reflection in the window. Not the girl exiled at 18, not the woman scraping by on scraps of love, but Olivia Donovan, chef, founder, survivor. The next morning, a letter arrived at my door. No return address, but I knew the handwriting, my father's. It was only one line. "We didn't think you'd survive without us." I smiled as I tossed it into the trash, because I hadn't just survived. I'd built something they could never touch, and that was the sweetest revenge of all.